There is a single image dominating discussions inside the White House this morning, and it is one no amount of messaging, rallies, or social media output can neutralize. Live security footage from JFK in New York, LAX in Los Angeles, and O'Hare in Chicago shows something that would once have been unthinkable. On a Friday morning in late January, traditionally one of the busiest periods for international travel, America's major gateways to the world are almost empty. These airports are normally the arteries of global commerce, filled with tourists, executives, and freight crews moving people, capital, and goods across borders. Today, they resemble abandoned terminals. At 6 o'clock Eastern Time, a decentralized global movement, one that began as an online joke among European users on TikTok and then spread rapidly through Asian markets, arrived in the United States in tangible form. What began as the slogan, "Make America Go Away," has now evolved into something far more consequential, a consumer-led economic boycott with global reach. The speed of its impact has unsettled policymakers. Unlike state-imposed sanctions, which require negotiation and time to take effect, this movement has acted immediately. Within 24 hours, international travel bookings to the United States collapsed by 90%. In Europe's major ports, including Rotterdam and Hamburg, dock workers began refusing to unload American cargo. In China, consumers live-streamed themselves discarding iPhones, a nationalist display that quickly went viral and triggered sharp pre-market losses for companies such as Apple and Tesla. According to sources inside the West Wing, President Donald Trump is alarmed. Those close to him say he understands one thing above all else: branding. His political authority has always rested on the idea that the United States represents aspiration, dominance, and success. For the first time, that image is collapsing. The American brand, carefully cultivated over decades, is now being openly rejected. The president's response has reportedly been chaotic. He has berated trade advisors, demanded that the European Union compel its citizens to purchase American goods, and openly discuss the seizure of foreign assets. Yet he is encountering a basic reality of market economics. While governments can be pressured into treaties, consumers cannot be forced into shops. Capitalism does not respond well to coercion. This moment marks the climax of a week of cascading crises. The boycott is not an abstract concept. It is a functioning mechanism, dismantling economic relationships in real time. There are reports of a confidential video call between the world's most powerful corporate leaders. Diplomatic channels once thought frozen are suddenly being reopened by Washington. And behind the scenes, discussions are underway about more extreme financial responses that could further destabilize the global system. To understand the depth of anxiety in Washington, one must grasp the velocity of public opinion. Governments move slowly, people do not. Following the president's inflammatory social media comments, in which he described European leaders as vassals, and the global circulation of footage showing the killing of nurse Sarah Jenkins in Minneapolis, public tolerance snapped. Decades of accumulated goodwill evaporated in a matter of days. The first visible rupture occurred in Denmark after renewed threats from Washington regarding Greenland. A viral campaign, "We're Bye-Bye USA," took hold in Copenhagen. Influencers who had long celebrated American culture began publicly canceling subscriptions to US-based streaming services, switching from American brands to domestic alternatives, and abandoning holiday plans in Florida in favor of Spain and Portugal. France followed swiftly. A country long ambivalent about American power reached a breaking point. Cafes in Paris displayed handwritten signs stating simply, "No American products served here." Videos circulated of customers returning Levi's jeans and Nike trainers. The hashtag #SansUSA, without America, surged to the top of European social media trends. What is unfolding is not merely diplomatic fallout. It is the rapid unraveling of America's soft power, the intangible influence that has long underpinned its economic and political dominance. And once that influence is lost, history suggests it is exceptionally difficult to recover. The backlash did not end in Europe. When it reached Asia, it escalated. In South Korea and Japan, both long-standing American allies, the response was shaped by something deeper than partisan disagreement. It was driven by humiliation. President Trump's remarks, characterizing allied nations as participants in a protection racket, struck a particularly sensitive nerve in societies where political legitimacy is closely tied to respect, predictability, and mutual obligation. What followed was not simply protest, but coordinated economic action. In Seoul, Samsung stores launched overnight trade-in programs for Apple devices, offering incentives so aggressive they effectively dismantled Apple's market position in a matter of hours. The marketing message was deliberate and pointed: switch to stability, switch to respect. This was not fringe activism. It was corporate alignment with public sentiment. In Japan, younger consumers, the demographic that sets cultural and commercial trends across East Asia, began posting videos of themselves burning American flags, not as an expression of religious or ideological extremism, but as a statement of cultural rejection. This distinction matters. The reaction was not rooted in doctrine, but in disgust. The widely circulated footage of Nurse Sarah Jenkins being killed in Minneapolis has now been viewed more than 2 billion times globally. For many viewers, purchasing American products now feels indistinguishable from endorsing state violence. This moment marks the collapse of America's most valuable export, its cultural credibility. Long before oil, weapons, or technology, the United States sold an idea: freedom, fairness, and aspiration. That idea is now broken. Analysts on Wall Street are calling this a reputational black swan event. Goldman Sachs issued an emergency note downgrading the entire U.S. consumer discretionary sector, warning that a boycott lasting just 1 month would strip $500 billion from the American economy. If sustained for 3 months, the result would resemble an outright depression. Yet consumer behavior, dramatic as it is, may not be the most destabilizing force at play. The greater threat lies with organized labor. The International Transport Workers Federation, representing 20 million workers worldwide, convened an emergency vote in London. In solidarity with American nurses and victims of state violence, it passed a resolution endorsing what it termed constructive delays. The consequences were immediate. In Rotterdam, Europe's largest port and the primary gateway to Germany's industrial core, dock workers began subjecting every American container to exhaustive inspection. Where checks once took minutes, they now take days. Cargo is opened, counted, and scrutinized in full. American agricultural products, vehicles, and machinery are sitting exposed on the docks, deteriorating by the hour. In Canada, longshore workers in Vancouver and Montreal, already angered by U.S. lumber tariffs, joined the action. They began refusing to load Canadian goods onto U.S.-bound trains. What began as a regional dispute has now expanded into a full maritime blockade. The effect is to strangle the American supply chain from the outside in. Major retailers, including Walmart and Target, are already warning of empty shelves within days. Manufacturing plants across the Midwest, many located in regions that form the president's political base, are shutting down. They cannot obtain European components and they cannot export finished goods to Asia. The economic pressure is moving rapidly from abstract markets to lived reality. The president attempted to respond via social media, threatening European dock workers and promising bans, seizures, and retaliation. These threats rang hollow. Blocking European shipping would cripple the United States itself. 40% of America's medical supplies and advanced technological components are imported. The unions are acutely aware of this leverage, and they are applying it with precision. As the streets mobilize, boardrooms are doing the same, quietly, methodically, and with devastating effect. Behind the public spectacle of boycotts and port blockades, a quieter and far more consequential process is unfolding. According to reporting from the Financial Times, a confidential video conference took place involving the chief executives of some of the world's most powerful corporations. Among those present were senior leaders from major consumer brands, industrial manufacturers, luxury conglomerates, and global financial institutions. The agenda was unambiguous: reducing exposure to the United States. For decades, multinational corporations regarded the American market as a safe harbor, a stable environment in which capital could be parked when geopolitical risk elsewhere became unmanageable. That assumption has now collapsed. Executives increasingly view the United States not as a refuge, but as a volatility risk. Leaked excerpts from the call reveal a stark assessment. One senior executive from a major German automotive firm reportedly told participants that no responsible company could rely on a market where asset seizure is openly discussed by the president, where the bond market shows signs of structural failure, and where state violence is broadcast globally. The conclusion was unanimous: investment must be redirected immediately towards Asia and South America. The strategy agreed was not dramatic withdrawal, but quiet suffocation. No press conferences, no announcements that might provoke retaliation from Washington. Instead, capital would be reallocated discreetly. Planned factories in Ohio quietly canceled, research centers shifted to Toronto or London, inventory levels reduced across U.S. warehouses. This is what economists describe as a capital strike. It does not cause a sudden crash, it starves the system of oxygen. The president has responded by branding corporate leaders as disloyal globalists. But the accusation carries little weight. These executives answer not to political figures, but to shareholders. And shareholders prize stability above all else. In undermining institutional predictability, the administration has rendered the United States increasingly uninvestable. There is a bitter irony at the heart of this moment. The president rose to power promising to build barriers against the outside world. Instead, the world is now erecting barriers against America. Several governments have issued travel advisories for the United States, warnings normally reserved for conflict zones. New Zealand elevated the U.S. to a high-risk destination, citing civil unrest, arbitrary detention, and the threat of state violence against foreign nationals. Germany advised its citizens to avoid protests, limit contact with federal law enforcement, and prepare for disrupted medical services due to strikes. The reputational damage is profound. Tourism supports approximately 10 million American jobs, concentrated in states such as Florida, Nevada, and New York. That sector is now collapsing. Hotels in Miami report cancellation rates approaching 80% for February. Las Vegas casinos are operating at a fraction of capacity. Major tourist destinations, including Disney World, are effectively empty. The administration's response has been reactive and unconvincing. The State Department attempted to issue counter-advisories warning Americans about travel in Europe. These were widely ignored. The public, both at home and abroad, has drawn its own conclusions based on visible evidence: viral footage of police violence, tear gas deployed against protesters, and the erosion of civil order. The credibility gap is now insurmountable. At this point, the president appears to recognize the scale of the damage. According to multiple sources, he has spent recent hours attempting to contact foreign leaders he publicly disparaged only days earlier. He is reportedly prepared to abandon previously non-negotiable demands, including territorial rhetoric and punitive tariffs. His objective is no longer dominance, but containment. Those calls have gone unanswered. French officials cited scheduling conflicts. Downing Street reiterated its support for joint European statements and indicated that dialogue would resume only if the tone from Washington fundamentally changed. This diplomatic silence is not accidental, it is deliberate. Political psychologists describe the tactic as gray rocking, the refusal to engage with a figure whose influence depends on reaction and confrontation. By withdrawing attention, pressure is applied without escalation. For a leader whose authority is sustained by constant visibility, the effect is destabilizing. This is not merely a diplomatic dispute, it is a recalibration of global power relationships. And it is unfolding not through military conflict or formal sanctions, but through disengagement, economic, cultural, and political. The consequences are already reshaping the international order. The president's final provocation did not compel submission. It prompted withdrawal. Faced with the growing prospect of economic contraction, the White House has shifted from confrontation to damage control. According to senior sources, the president spent much of the morning attempting to contact European leaders he had publicly antagonized only days earlier. He was prepared to retreat, abandoning territorial rhetoric, suspending tariffs, and seeking a symbolic reset. What he wanted above all was for the statements condemning his administration to be withdrawn and for diplomatic normality to resume. Those efforts failed. The Élysée Palace indicated that the French president was unavailable. Downing Street reiterated its support for the joint European position and made clear that no discussions would take place until the rhetoric from Washington changed materially. The message was unmistakable. There would be no negotiation under pressure. Silence in this context has become a strategic tool. This approach is deliberate. By refusing to engage, foreign governments are depriving the president of the confrontation on which his authority thrives. The tactic, often referred to as gray rocking, relies on disengagement rather than escalation. For a political figure dependent on attention, the effect is destabilizing. The absence of response is exerting pressure more effectively than any formal sanction. The boycott has now reached the sector most critical to maintaining market confidence: technology. The European Union's indication that it may invoke its anti-coercion instrument has sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley. If transatlantic data transfers are restricted, major U.S. technology firms would lose access to a market accounting for nearly a third of their global revenue. The implications are immediate and severe. Senior executives from leading technology companies are reported to be in urgent discussions with the administration. Their purpose is not to offer support, but to deliver a warning. Stabilize the situation, or markets will absorb the consequences. Even figures previously aligned with the president appear to be distancing themselves. Elon Musk, once instrumental in earlier diplomatic overtures, posted a cryptic image depicting a sinking ship accompanied by the word "abandon." The symbolism was not subtle. A shift among technology leaders would carry political consequences. Online ecosystems shape public discourse, and the platforms themselves possess the technical capacity to limit reach, visibility, and amplification. Under regulatory pressure from Europe, these companies may decide that neutrality is no longer viable. Meanwhile, the effects are being felt domestically. News of port blockades and supply disruptions has triggered consumer panic. Americans are rushing to purchase essentials: medicines, electronics, household goods, placing further strain on a just-in-time supply chain ill-equipped to absorb shocks. Retailers are warning of imminent shortages. When scarcity becomes visible, political accountability follows. Public anger is spreading beyond ideological lines. Consumers uninterested in foreign policy are now confronted with empty shelves and delayed medical supplies. Insulin shipments held in European ports have become symbols of policy failure. The consequences of diplomatic isolation have entered the American household. An even greater risk now looms. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are meeting in emergency session. On the agenda is a long-discussed but rarely executed option: coordinated reduction of reliance on the U.S. dollar. In previous years, such a move was theoretical. In current conditions, it is being framed as risk management. Should energy pricing or reserve holdings shift away from the dollar, the consequences would be profound. Inflation would accelerate, savings would erode, and America's ability to finance its debt would be sharply curtailed. This is the financial equivalent of a nuclear option. The president is acutely aware of it. Currency indicators reflect growing uncertainty, and confidence in U.S. fiscal stability is weakening. Accounts from inside the White House describe a president under extreme psychological strain. He is reportedly withdrawn, pacing, and fixated on maps illustrating the spread of the boycott. Staff have limited his access to sensitive materials and reduced his exposure to high-stress briefings. The collision between his self-image and global rejection appears to be producing increasingly erratic behavior. Americans living abroad are already bearing the consequences. Reports are emerging of U.S. citizens being refused service, facing housing terminations, or finding their financial instruments rejected. Embassies, weakened by diplomatic paralysis, are struggling to respond. These personal accounts are circulating widely, reinforcing domestic discontent. What began as a trade dispute has become a form of global quarantine. The boycott has achieved what formal sanctions often fail to deliver: widespread disengagement. In a globalized economy, isolation is not imposed solely by governments. It is enforced by consumers, workers, investors, and institutions acting independently. The lesson is stark. In the modern international system, fear is a diminishing currency. Organization, coordination, and collective withdrawal now carry greater power. The global market has issued its verdict. Whether domestic voters will follow remains an open question. The markets will open on Monday morning. The consequences will be measurable.